The quiet hours of the night always held an eerie charm for the cleaner at the small Montessori school, tucked into the basement of a centuries-old church. Each evening, after finishing a shift at the grocery store, they would arrive at the school close to 10:30 p.m. to start their cleaning. The ancient wooden structure groaned with every step, and the dim, flickering lights often cast unsettling shadows across the hallways. That particular night, everything began as usual. The cleaner worked diligently, moving from one classroom to the next. By the time they started on the third room, it was nearly midnight. The silence was so thick it pressed against their ears, broken only by the rhythmic swish of their mop against the tiled floor. Then, the doorbell rang, a loud, echoing chime that reverberated through the entire church. Startled, the cleaner froze. No one ever came by this late. The school was locked tight, and the church upstairs had been closed for hours. Heart pounding, they cautiously climbed the creaking staircase toward the entrance. Peering around the corner of the doorframe, they saw her, a frail old woman, her wiry gray hair framing a face pale as moonlight. She stood motionless, staring straight ahead through the glass of the heavy wooden door. The cleaner stepped back, unease prickling their skin. She must be from the old age home across the lot, they thought. Perhaps she'd wandered off. Trying to shake the discomfort, they returned to the classroom, focusing on their work. Minutes passed, but the rhythmic motion of mopping did little to calm their nerves. Then came the sound of banging. It started soft but grew louder, reverberating through the hallways. The cleaner's breath caught in their throat. The banging was accompanied by a voice, a quivering, desperate wail. "Abby! Abby! Help me!" The voice pierced through the stillness, each syllable drenched in despair. Steeling themselves, the cleaner crept back upstairs. The woman was no longer at the door. Instead, she was standing by a window near the stairs, her face pressed against the glass. Her hollow eyes locked with theirs. "Abby! Help me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. Panic surged through the cleaner. They bolted back downstairs, locking themselves in a classroom. With trembling hands, they dialed the number of the old age home. The attendant assured them that all residents were accounted for, but her tone shifted when the cleaner described the woman. "Stay where you are," she warned. "Don't go near her." The banging on the windows grew louder. The cleaner whispered into the phone, barely able to speak. "She's still outside. She's calling for Abby." The attendant paused before speaking again. "That matches the description of a resident who lived here. But she passed away years ago." The blood drained from the cleaner's face as they listened to the banging grow frantic. Moments later, male voices echoed from outside. The banging stopped, replaced by a muffled struggle. Then silence. The cleaner never found out who, or what, the woman was. But to this day, when they hear the name Abby, they feel a chill run down their spine. For a gas station attendant, working the graveyard shift was mostly a dull, lonely affair. The long, quiet nights offered little more than boredom. But one fateful evening, the monotony shattered. A strange customer appeared, only to return with a haunting purpose. What began as a mundane interaction spiraled into a terrifying ordeal, one that defied explanation and left lasting fear. Late nights at the gas station were usually uneventful. As the night shift cashier, the worker had grown accustomed to the humdrum monotony of stocking shelves and watching the clock tick slowly toward dawn. But on this particular night, the air carried an unsettling tension, heavy and almost tangible, as if warning of an impending disturbance. At 2 a.m., the bell on the door jingled, jolting the worker awake from their sleepy haze. A man in his 30s strolled in, his demeanor casual, almost too relaxed. He wandered down the aisles, his movements unhurried. At first, it seemed like he was browsing, but something about his aimlessness felt off. The worker glanced out the window to see if there was a car at the pumps. The lot was empty, eerily still under the dim glow of the overhead lights. After a few minutes, the man looked toward the counter, muttered a quick thanks, and left without buying anything. The worker shrugged it off, assuming the man had pocketed something small and walked out. But the eerie encounter lingered in the back of their mind, a prickling sense of unease they couldn't shake. An hour later, the worker decided to stock the shelves, hoping to distract themselves from the memory. Lost in the rhythm of their task, they didn't notice the man until he was at the end of the aisle. This time, he was dressed differently, his hoodie pulled low over his face, obscuring most of his features. The worker's blood ran cold. The man hadn't entered through the front door, there had been no jingle of the bell. How had he gotten in? The man moved deliberately, his hands hidden in his pockets, each step closer tightening the coil of fear in the worker's chest. As he approached the counter, the worker forced a smile, their voice trembling. "Welcome back. Can I help you find something?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he stopped inches from the counter, slowly pulling a small handgun from his hoodie pocket. The worker's breath hitched, and their vision blurred at the edges. The man placed a pack of gum on the counter with an almost mocking deliberation. "Just this," he said, his tone flat, devoid of any emotion. Heart racing, the worker scanned the gum, the faint beep of the register breaking the oppressive silence. The man slid a crumpled dollar bill across the counter, his fingers still gripping the weapon. "Thanks," he said, before turning and leaving as casually as he had arrived. The worker stood frozen, heart pounding in their ears, legs trembling beneath them. Was it a warning? A sick joke? Or something far more sinister? The question swirled in their mind as they shakily reached for the phone to call the police. The authorities arrived quickly, but the man was never identified. No car, no security footage, no explanation. The incident remains a chilling mystery, a haunting memory for the worker who now spends each night glancing nervously toward the door, wondering if the man will return, and what he might want next time. A cybersecurity analyst's peaceful, overnight shift in an empty office building seemed like the perfect job. At first. But one quiet night, the stillness gave way to something far more unsettling, an ominous presence. Signs began to emerge, signs that they weren't alone. As the terrifying truth unfolded, it revealed a chilling connection to the building's dark, forgotten past. And a desperate, dangerous plot. Working nights as a cybersecurity analyst was a lonely job, but it had its perks. The office was always quiet, the coffee was strong, and the solitude provided a strange sense of peace. But that fragile comfort was shattered one fateful night, a night that would forever haunt the worker. The shift began at midnight, just like any other. The previous analyst had already left, leaving the building eerily silent, save for the soft hum of computers. The worker performed their usual routine, a quick check of the empty hallways, a glance at the surveillance cameras, and a fresh pot of coffee brewing in the corner. Everything seemed normal. Settling into their desk, they began scanning the log files, the glowing screen casting flickering shadows in the dimly lit room. An hour passed uneventfully. But when they went to retrieve their coffee, something felt wrong. The coffee machine was off. The pot was empty. Frowning, they brushed it off as a minor electrical glitch, turning the machine back on before returning to their desk. But when they reached for their phone, usually resting beside the keyboard, it was gone. A chill ran down their spine. Had they misplaced it? They searched the desk, their pockets, and even retraced their steps to the coffee station. Nothing. Then, a faint shuffling noise broke the silence. It came from the far corner of the office, where rows of empty desks stood cloaked in shadows. The worker froze, every muscle tensing. Slowly, they turned toward the sound, scanning the darkened room. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, their phone alarm blared from the opposite corner of the office. The worker's blood turned to ice. The sound shouldn't have been possible, it wasn't where they had left the phone. Their breathing quickened as they realized the horrifying truth: they weren't alone. Fighting the urge to panic, they called out in a shaky voice, "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, the air heavy with tension. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, a man clutching a knife. Adrenaline surged as the worker bolted for the exit, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The man didn't speak, didn't shout, he simply followed, his pace deliberate. The worker burst through the office doors into the cold night air and sprinted across the street to a nearby gas station. Heart pounding, they borrowed the station's phone and called 911. The police arrived faster than expected, and after a tense search of the office building, they apprehended the intruder. He was identified as a disgruntled former employee, recently fired, who had been trying to retrieve sensitive information from a company laptop. Hidden in his pocket was a small knife, and the worker's stolen phone, found tucked behind some boxes. Though the worker escaped unharmed, the memory of that night lingered. Every creak of a floorboard, every unexpected sound in the quiet office, felt like a ghost of that harrowing encounter. They knew they had been lucky to get out. Sometimes, solitude can be the most dangerous thing of all. It was just after 11 p.m. when I left work and started the familiar 45-minute drive back to my house. Living several miles outside the city meant the roads grew quieter the farther I drove, and I always found the peaceful solitude of the drive a perfect way to unwind. As I turned onto the long, forested side road that led to my house, a dense fog settled in, limiting visibility to only a few feet. The road was always dimly lit and surrounded by trees, which made it feel eerie at night. But I had driven this route for years without incident and didn't think much of it, until that night. Through the fog, I noticed a faint blinking light in the distance. It was impossible to gauge its distance or even which side of the road it was on. I slowed to around 15 miles per hour, squinting into the haze. Suddenly, the blinking light disappeared, and before I could react, a small car pulled out of the roadside darkness and stopped directly in front of me. My brakes screeched, but it was too late. I tapped the rear of the car with mine. Stunned, I stepped out of my car, scanning for damage. Neither vehicle seemed significantly harmed, and I waited beside my car for the other driver to emerge. I could see movement inside the car, but they weren't getting out. Something about their hesitation unsettled me. Their car was old, its headlights off, and the longer I stood there, the stranger it all felt. Finally, a man emerged from the car. He was middle-aged, large, and moved toward me slowly, his gaze darting around without ever meeting mine. "Is everything okay?" I asked, keeping my distance. "You pulled out pretty fast." He mumbled a vague apology, his tone unnerving. I told him there was no real damage and that I'd be leaving, but as I reached for my car door, he called out, "Wait." He claimed he needed to check for damage first. Reluctantly, I agreed and watched as he pretended to inspect the bumper. But then he began circling his car, far beyond where I'd hit, his behavior growing stranger by the second. That's when I saw it, a large figure shifting in the back seat of his car. The door creaked open, and another man began climbing out. Adrenaline surged through me as I jumped back into my car, slamming the door and locking it. Both men rushed toward me, waving their arms and shouting, but I didn't wait to hear what they wanted. I floored the gas pedal, swerving around their car and speeding down the foggy road. In my rearview mirror, I saw their headlights switch on. For several tense seconds, they followed me, but then their lights disappeared into the fog. Shaking, I pulled into a gas station near my house and waited, heart pounding, to ensure I wasn't followed. After 15 minutes, I drove home, still rattled by the encounter. I didn't report it to the police at the time, unsure if I was overreacting. But now, I wonder, what if their next target wasn't as lucky? I had been trucking for years and thought I'd seen it all. My job often required long overnight hauls, and I'd grown used to sleeping at truck stops when the route was too far to complete in a single day. But one delivery route changed everything. That night, I finished my deliveries late and started the long drive back to the warehouse. By 1 a.m., I knew I needed to rest before continuing. A truck stop was 40 miles ahead, so I pushed on, my eyes heavy as the road stretched endlessly in front of me. As I drove, something flickered in my side mirror, headlights. They were so close to my trailer that I couldn't see the car itself. I kept waiting for them to pass, but they stayed glued to my bumper, unnervingly close. My frustration grew, but with the truck stop only a few miles away, I decided to ignore them. Finally, I reached the rest area and pulled into an open spot. The car behind me followed, inching closer and closer to the back of my truck before stopping. Alarm bells rang in my head. I stepped out, determined to confront whoever was inside. But as soon as my door slammed shut, the car reversed and sped off. I shook it off as an odd encounter, locked my truck doors, and tried to get some sleep. But around 3 a.m., I jolted awake to a loud bang. My heart raced as another bang echoed, louder this time. Peering into my side mirror, I saw a faint shadow moving at the back of the truck. Knife in hand, I quietly exited the cab, leaving the driver's door ajar to avoid noise. Crouching low, I peeked under the trailer and froze. A man stood at the back of my truck, his car parked behind him with the lights off. He was fiddling with the lock on my trailer door, scratches already visible. Fear surged through me. From my hidden position, I shouted, "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" My voice wavered, but it startled him enough. He scrambled back to his car and sped off into the night. The scratches on my trailer door told me his intentions were likely theft, but the realization that I had been inside the whole time haunted me. What would have happened if I hadn't woken up? I left the truck stop immediately and finished my drive home. To this day, the thought of a car silently following me still sends chills down my spine. Concerts in Chicago's South Side came with a warning label, but cheap tickets and a lively crowd made it feel worth the risk. My friends and I had a great time at the show, but by the time we hit the road, traffic was unbearable. Cars crawled inch by inch, and frustration grew in the car. Tired of the gridlock, we took a detour, weaving through narrow neighborhood streets in search of a faster route. At first, we laughed about the eeriness, people were standing outside in their yards, even at this late hour. But the farther we drove, the quieter it got. No other cars were in sight, and the laughter faded into nervous silence. Then, at the end of the street, we saw it. A car parked sideways, blocking both lanes. I hit the brakes and backed out, returning to the previous road. Relief was short-lived. Just a few blocks later, another car blocked the road in the same way. We froze. Two men emerged from a nearby house, one approaching my window while the other stood behind their car. The man at my window motioned for me to roll it down. Reluctantly, I cracked it open an inch. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone casual but unsettling. "Just trying to get back to the highway," I replied, keeping my hands on the wheel. The second man approached the passenger side, and before I could react, both grabbed at the doors, yanking furiously. My friend screamed as I reversed, their shouts drowned by the sound of the man's arm scraping against the window gap. He stumbled back as I floored it, speeding away from the trap. We returned to the main road, shaken but safe. The image of their faces and the sound of their pounding fists still haunt me. I don't know what they had planned, but I'm certain we narrowly escaped something terrible.